Okay. So we've got Zoom in the background in case you hear somebody talking that we don't see. Welcome everybody. Today is our first CNC Demo Day. So if you're not a member here, we have recently started doing what we call CNC SIG meetings, special interest groups. So the first Sunday of every month, we get together. It's a very informal meeting. If you've got a project, something, people bring them in, we talk about them. Sometimes we have a theme, sometimes we don't. I think some of the past ones were Halloween, some other stuff like that. But from those conversations in that group, we figured out there's a theme, or there's a common desire for people to want to learn a little bit more about CNC and specific topics. So rather than just try to shoot out there and put up classes, we wanted to do these little demo days where we do little 15-minute, they'll probably run a little bit longer, knowing me and Travis, quick demonstrations of some of the products or the software that we use here, the techniques. And from that, we've got a binder here. We'd like to get your interest if you're interested in a class and seeing that. My goal is to make these classes free or maybe like donation-based, so that's just continued education that you're not having to pay for. But we'd like to grab the interest of which ones people want to learn and let that dictate the priority of what we bring on. So this is our first demo day that we're doing today. We are going to include some laser topics with it just because Travis and I, Joaquin both, the common theme between CNC, lasers, vinyl cutters, all that stuff is vectors and digital tools. Once you learn vectors and these digital tools, it's actually really easy to go between machines. And you can also really elevate your makings by using multiple machines. So we wanted to include a little cross promotion. If you've taken our CNC beginners class, we've done that now where we do the class out there, we make a cutting board and then we bring it in the laser room and we just show you how easy it is to engrave that cutting board that you just made. So Travis will have some CNC inlay and then some laser marquetry that he'll go over. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to reach out. Let us know if you're not a member. Tomorrow morning, we're hosting our first open house day from 9 to 11 a.m. where you can just come in and look at the whole shop. You're more than welcome to look at the shop today as well, but if you want to have a few more questions, get a little more nitty gritty, we're doing that tomorrow from 9 to 11 a.m. And feel free to invite anybody you want to bring with you as well. So I'm going to let Travis start off for us.
So if you guys know James, you know why his presentation may go on a little more than, say, 15 minutes. Let me tell you why mine might go on more than 15 minutes. James gave me 2 topics, each of which is about this big, and he gave me this much time. Okay? So what I'm going to be doing is, I'm going to be doing 3 things real briefly. I'm going to be covering these topics of inlays and marquetry, but really at a very high level, just to satisfy any curiosity about what these things are. So I'll tell you how it's done. First, what it is, how it's done, and then a little bit about how we would teach it. Okay, so you can see what it's all about. Now, to begin with, since I'm covering 2 topics let's see how much over time I go. Okay, so covering 2 topics in one presentation, I need to distinguish what those 2 things are. And to begin with, we'll just find some definitions. Inlays, that's the first topic. An inlay is when you're insetting wood into another wood. And this is a wood-oriented presentation. It could be a lot of different materials. This is a wood-oriented presentation. And you can see here we have different woods, and they're inset in what is just a large panel. So it might be the top of a cabinet, it might be in front of a door. It's something that's large, and you're inlaying pieces of wood to create images. And here we have a relatively nice-looking, tight-fitting inlay. That's inlays. Marquetry, by contrast, think of it as a giant jigsaw puzzle. It doesn't have to be inlaid in anything. It's a lot of pieces of wood of different types that you're putting together in such a way that you're creating a picture. So this is all very, very thin wood. I'd say like between 1/40th of an inch and 1/64th, 1/28th of an inch. Really thin stuff. That's why it can be cut so easily with a laser, is that laser just passes right through it. I have a $350 10-watt laser, cuts all these veneers just beautifully. Okay? But that's marquetry. Lots of little pieces, think of it as a jigsaw puzzle, and it doesn't have to be inlaid in anything. However, you can do a combination of the 2. This is an example of some marquetry that was inlaid into a larger piece of wood. Okay? So we have inlays and we have marquetry. Let's talk about those 2 topics. Inlays, as I say, are when you set some wood into another piece of wood. And an easy way to do that is just when you have straight sides. So you just cut something out, you cut a hole, similar shape, you put it in, and it's pretty straightforward. It's not really sophisticated. It doesn't necessarily result in a great, tight-looking image in the end, but it is very straightforward. It's very handy in certain things, like, for instance, joinery, if you're trying to keep some wood together, as an example I'm going to give you. The other one is where you may or may not be able to see it, but these are tapered edges. I call it a V-bit edge. It's really where the edges are tapered. So you end up with a shape like this as you go down. And if you were to take two pieces and put them together, I'll show you that in just a second, you get very tight-fitting inlays. Straight drop-ins, very useful. Want to hold wood together, bow ties, dog bones, things like that are very straightforward. You can use it for a lot of other things, but there is a basic constraint when you are using a drop-in like this, and if you're doing it with a CNC. Any bit on a router or a CNC has a certain diameter, and the radius is the tightest corner you can get. So while this is an exaggerated radius, there's only so tight a corner you can get. You could never get a sharp corner. You could not get a lot of detail. Now, as we move to this next topic, which is the V-bit,
Wow.
or angled, pardon?
I just said, wow, that's really
Oh,
great.
yeah, we can get this kind of expression at any moment, okay? Anytime, please. What you see here are some of the things that really set this apart. One, really remarkable good fits between the different pieces of wood. And two, you can come with some really good detail. You can get sharp corners. Because with a V-bit and this angular cut, you're able to get those results. And I'll show you how. The basic approach with this V-bit process is you have a inlay portion, and you can see this is all cut out so that it is coming to a peak. And then you have the pocket portion, which is the complement of that. Now, they're not exactly, this fits exactly into this. They're mathematically just enough different that this is what you end up getting. That is to say, this will fit into this, but you could press it as much as you want, and you're probably, if you do it right, you're not going to get this to down this level right here. You're going to have a glue gap in here. And as you press down on the sides, you get really, really tight connection between the woods. That's the source of the wow. Okay, is the first thing is how tight the wood fits to one another. It just looks really good. If you've done that, so you take some wood, you take a inlay portion, and you take your pocket portion, and you put them together, and you put some glue in there, and you squeeze them down. You'll end up with a bit of a gap in between them. You run that through a bandsaw, okay, separate them, and you'd end up with something like this. Very tight, very nice, but this is just one wood inside of another wood. You can repeat that process over and over and over again. So here you have, for instance, 4 or 5 different woods that are inlaid to create an image. Okay? And the other factor that comes with this V-carving approach, or this V-bit or angled approach, is you can get these sharp details. You remember when I described that straight drop-in inlay, the radius of the end mill, or the bit, was the tightest corner you're going to be able to get. But with a V-bit, you can get remarkable tight details, and because of the compression process, you end up with really beautiful results. Now, in this topic, what we have done is, in the class, we have a very simple mathematical process. There's a process for creating the female side, there's a process for creating the male side. It's very straightforward. And once you understand it, you can take a set of vectors, and you can apply this inside of the software that we use, which is V-carve. And you can create 2 halves, and you get consistently good results. And that's what the class is all about, is just teaching how to use this logic inside the software, which is what we teach using the CNC. And you can go ahead and create these things as days long. So I'm going to hand out a few things here, which is, on the one hand, I'd like you guys to see how these are all slightly different variations on the numbers here. And some will actually float a little bit, some will be very tight. And when you squeeze it down, you'll also see that there's a gap on some and not on the others. On one extreme, you're going to see a gap, and you're going to find that it's really tight. You that's what you shoot for, because you're gonna wanna run that through a bandsaw separately. Okay? So this is, if we just pass it around the room, and if you could end it up on the top of that cabinet over there.
So after you bandsaw, do you just sand it down to make it flush?
Yeah.
That's so cool.
So there's that. I'm gonna hand out this one, which is actually the two pieces, so you can see one of the projects. This is what we have actually created in the class just because it was simple. These are my initials. So this is just different types of wood that are married. So the effects you can see here are the tight corners, the good fits, and you can also see how one wood up against another wood looks either worse or better, depending upon your choice.
So is this considered that void?
Yes, it should not go, it would not touch the bottom of the pocket. So you could squeeze that in and you'd be able to have a gap, a tiny gap, and then you run that through the bandsaw. All right, let's move on to another topic.
Travis, I think we had another question.
Yes, sorry.
I'm curious if.
So if I don't see your hand go up, it's this guy's fault. Yes, go ahead.
I mean, you mentioned bandsaw as a technique to put this up.
Yes.
I mean, any general reason not to use CNC planing?
No, not at all. In
clear it up?
fact, yeah, no, you absolutely could do that.
Particularly for a bigger
The-
piece, right?
The typical workflow that most people have used is a bandsaw, but yeah, you can
It's
just
like a
leave it in place.
Traditional recutting, right?
I mean, the thing about the CNC is you'd have to have left it there long enough to cure on the bed. And so typically you have to come back later and do it. And how are you gonna get the exact positioning on the bed? You could, but it's just easier to bring it into a bandsaw.
Depends on the project.
The other reason you may bandsaw is if you're using a thicker piece of wood for your mail pocket.
Yeah.
When you bandsaw it, you can go back, flatten it, cut another one, cut another
Yeah,
one. But if
maybe
you
less
surface it off, you
wasteful
yeah.
of material? Yeah.
Okay. So, the next topic is marquetry. If you remember, think of this in terms of just a jigsaw puzzle, very thin pieces of wood you've cut come together. But as we transition from CNC to laser, we have to talk about the concept of kerf. So, when a laser does its job, let's say this is a piece of veneer here, the laser comes down, the way it cuts is it's burning. And when it burns, material is disappearing in the form of smoke, and a gap is left behind. That gap is what's called kerf. Now, if you have a jigsaw puzzle and you are assembling it, you want all the pieces to fit really well, which means you're going to have to compensate for the fact that the piece you cut was actually smaller than you intended. You have to compensate for the kerf. Let's assume that this line right here is the vector that you're guiding the laser beam with to do the cut. The distance between the edge of the material and the middle, you have to grow this enough to be able to fill the void. So you have to deal with kerf. It's just a fact of life. You're going to do marquetry, that if you want the pieces to fit well and you're going to use a laser, this is what you have to do. Now the reason it wasn't an issue with the CNC is, with the CNC you could say, I've got this vector, and I'm going to cut on the outside of it, let's say. It can go right up against the edge. There is no resulting kerf. So that's why it was an important concept to introduce right here. The kerf would make all the pieces too small in laser marquetry unless you could grow to compensate. So that's one important notion. And you can see what results here. This is the same vector to cut the eye hole as to cut the eye. And you can see that there is a resulting gap. If I want that to be a tight fit, I have to grow the outside by half the distance of that gap. So I have to grow the inside by half the distance of that gap. And then I have some really tight fitting marquetry. And happily, there's software that does this for you. Anybody who's learned lasers here, and frankly, most people who are using lasers that are diode lasers or Chinese lasers, will end up using this piece of software called Lightburn. And Lightburn, among many, many things it can do, allows you to do an offset for kerf. So you can actually grow your pieces just enough to be able to fill that void. Software that we would use to teach marquetry here would be ImageBin, and it too can compensate for the kerf. So certain woods will burn and make a larger gap. Thicker woods might make a smaller gap. It all depends on what it is that your wood is. You can have different kerfs for different woods if you're trying to get that really good-looking result in the end. I'm going to show you examples of good-looking and bad-looking because I've been learning over the course of a year and a half using the software, and obviously my early stuff sucks. Okay, so I'm going to show you what it does that my stuff. this one right here, I want you to take a look at the two stars. The top star, the thin star, is when you don't compensate for kerf. And the other one is where you do compensate for kerf, and you can see the pieces are just right up against one another. And when you do get marquetry correct, this is an award winner from a contest not too long ago. Everything looks remarkably tight. You do not see any gaps in there. You just get some beautiful, beautiful results. And that's really the objective in the end.
The top one's poor curve.
Pardon?
The top one's the bad curve.
Yeah, the ones with a gap in them, yeah. So, while kerf is one thing you have to concern yourself if you're going to do laser marquetry, another thing is you're painting pictures with wood. And you're doing this with the goal in mind of using the character of the wood to help paint the picture. So, wood is obviously of varying colors. It has different grain structures. And it may also have just a lot of interesting features. We call them figures, and you may have heard terms like burl or bird's eye, fiddleback, or spalted. These are all crazy features of veneer. So here we have some wood with some very interesting character to it. Or it could just be straight lines. Again, character you might want to take advantage of when you're painting a picture. So you want to be able to take advantage of the character of the veneers that you have. And for instance, I have several hundred sheets of veneer, and I pick and choose not only the veneer sheet, but what portion of that veneer sheet I want in my picture. So I have to be able to position the laser to cut exactly where I want on that sheet of veneer to get the piece that I want. I'll show you this in just a second. And lastly, once I've cut something, so for instance, once I cut something, I don't want to ever have to go back and figure out what's been cut and what hasn't been cut. Got too many sheets in there. So here we have a sheet that has a bunch of cut pieces. This is on one of the pieces I'll show you in a minute. And after I've cut all that, it's no longer available. I can't just assume that I can go back some future date and cut in the same spot. So I have to be able to take inventory of what's happened to my veneer. And I'll show you all those things right now. So when it comes to the character, this is a scanned piece of veneer right here. And on the bird's neck, I had wanted it to sort of have like a collar. And so I searched in this, and I found this portion right here. I really like the dark and the light. And I knew that that's the exact piece of marquetry that I wanted. So I was able to then have that be represented in my rendering here. That has to do with taking advantage of the character of the wood. Now, when it comes to positioning, for instance, I want all of these to look like they were heading in that direction, parallel to the wing direction. So that means that when I cut it, not only do I have to orient it the right way, James, I'm officially running over now. And so I know that I wanted to be at this position for each of these cuts in the inventory. So I needed to be able to position things in order to cut exactly. Now this is trending so far here, okay? But I needed to be able to say where I wanted the cut to take place in that veneer. And thirdly, once I have cut something out, like for instance, I cut this portion out of this piece of veneer, I want to make sure I know it's been used. So I'll never go back and use it again. So the software will actually just turn any area that has been cut into black. So I know that all this is still available to me. I don't have to accidentally cut someplace a second time that's been cut. But I know that all of this can still be used. So those three things that I was talking about are things that are worked very nicely into the package that I'm going to describe to you, which is what I would use if I were going to be teaching marquetry. The topic is marquetry. The examples will show up more in just a second. But the way this thing will be taught is using a piece of software called ImagePaint. Let me just give you what the flow is like. I'm keeping it simple here. This is a very simple line drawing. This is just like, yes?
Sorry. So you talked about selecting grain for visual. Was there any functional consideration for that, or structural consideration that you need to worry about?
those are considerations at points. Like for instance, I've done some small projects, and the pieces are so small that you either lose them, or the burning takes them to a smaller size, or there are all sorts of issues that have to do with structural. The veneer has to actually hold together well, and so there's certain, you have to watch the grain, you have to do things that are going to make sure that it holds together. But in general, let me just answer your question by saying no. Just assume it's a piece of paper, and you just cut out what you want. Okay? So this is like a picture. This is like a million dots. It's like a JPEG or something like that. It's useless for anybody who wants to use a CNC, a vinyl cutter, a laser cutter, whatever. It's useless to us because those tools follow lines. So we have to get lines or vectors out of that. So here we have just a picture that I found on the internet. And I did what's called centerline tracing. Now they look very similar. But all of a sudden, this is a mathematically defined set of lines. Okay? I can actually say laser, go cut that line. And it knows where to go, where to start, where to end, etc. Okay? So I had to go from an image, a raster image, to a vector image. And then I had to take the next step, which is not obvious. Let me just spend a second on that. If I told the laser to cut out that eye, and I said, cut that eye out, it would cut out a big circle, like that, just one big circle. And then I say, cut the small thing in the middle, and then cut a small circle. But I couldn't put the small circle into the big circle. I would have to have said, cut the donut out. So you have to take all the areas in here and make them individual pieces. It's just a feature of software. This works with Adobe Illustrator or Corel Draw. And in those software, you can say, smartly fill this area. It takes this eyeball and doesn't make it a big circle and a small circle. It makes it a donut and a small circle. All of a sudden, I'm getting pieces. I'm getting jigsaw puzzle pieces when I take it to a laser and cut it out. All these individual lines here are just for character. There's score lines, which are just burning the surface of the wood, but that's a separate process to just give it character. Only closed vector areas, or areas that could look like a separate piece, will get cut out by the laser. Then with this, I have all my inventories of veneers. So all of these things have been scanned into my computer. They're representing veneers that I own. And those veneers are something I can go into the drawer and say, I need number 52, number 52. And I wanted to cut this area right here. This is what I would see on the screen, and I would be able to take that vector and drag it anywhere I want on the image of my veneer, and eventually I would cut it out. So here we are drawing a rendering. This is just a rendering from my veneers. A rendering from my veneers. And it then would send out to, in this case, Lightburn. These are the vectors that are cut. So that's the process you go through. From raster to vectors. Now you have lines. From lines to actual objects, where you end up with every single piece that you need for the puzzle to be a separate piece that can be cut. And then you paint it with the veneers that you have to create the image that you want. That then gets output one veneer sheet at a time. So for instance, this one right here is the body. That would be a separate veneer for the black hair, separate for the background. And each of those veneers I would put into my laser, a very precise spot, so they could go to the exact right spot and cut exactly what I want. Okay? So the two big things that were important with Marquetry were one, compensating for kerf, and the softwares can do that, so the pieces will grow just enough to be able to get a tight fit. And then the second one was to be able to manage that inventory of veneers. Because the only way you're going to paint pictures is if you have the character you want. So here I'm going to pass around a few things for you to take a look at. Let's take a look at what they're like. So this is just a raster image. Again, just dots. You can see the dots there. Of Mickey. I went ahead and then turned into vectors and painted it. And then I went ahead and cut it. So on this thing, one of the things I want to point out is I really liked the knot that I wanted for the nose. Now, if it had been off, it would have gotten half a knot, right? Or if I had been off a little bit, it wouldn't have been centered on the nose. But I was able to get exactly what I wanted because the software not only shows me the grains of my veneer when I'm doing my job, it allows me to place the vectors on exactly the right spot, but when I put it in my laser, because of the way I set it up, it would go ahead and cut that exact spot. And so that's how you're able to get this. This one has pretty good kerf compensation, so this is a good one to pass around. I want to look at some of my earlier projects, which I'll show you in just a second here, They all have some flaws. This has a variety of flaws that I can point out, but one of them I'll just make obvious. These are laser flares from honeycomb deck. I didn't take that into account when I was cutting those pieces. This is an early one. This was a very thick veneer. I ended up having to do some extra burning, so I ended up not only making it dark, but making a curve. If I don't tell you these things, you can just say, oh, those look pretty good. But I didn't like this one because of the, I didn't have enough contrast there. But fun project. This one happens to be epoxy coated lens. This one right here has I really enjoyed getting the grains of these things to make it look like it was in the direction the feathers would go. And that was all really straightforward with the software.
Since the different woods have different curves, is that accounted for in the software? You could say, like, I'm cutting.
You absolutely can do that. I'm not that good, and I'm not going to put the time in to figure out every single veneer. So I have one that is for almost all of my veneers, and I know some toughies that I've dealt with, and I have to come up with special kerf for those. But it's got to be an important wood for me to actually come up with a separate kerf. So no, I just have one that I use for almost all. So that's why some of these things are a little bit of gap when you see it.
Are all your veneers a consistent thickness?
I bought them to be that, but for instance, I really wanted to get some colored veneers, and so these are very plain in character, but the supplier, coloredveneer.com, had basically this uniform thickness. So almost all of it is in the like 1/64th of an inch, 1/40th of an inch range. This is a little bit thicker than that, and I have quite a few colors at this point. So for this, I would have had to come up with a separate cut to get the curve that I want.
So different thickness affects the curve?
Yes, it can. Yes.
Damn.
And then you're
And
doing.
then oily versus non-oily. I mean, there's lots of characteristics of wood that can affect the curve, but I'm never going to get to the point where, well, I'm never going to get to that point of caring that much about it, like in person. Yes?
So like laser flaring technology, you just put like a sacrificial piece that you're cutting on.
I've taken several tacks on that. I don't really have a favorite. One of them is I simply put it on top of sacrificial MDF or something like that, but then there's smoke capture underneath, so I don't necessarily want that. I put it on something that was elevated a little bit, and then you had to worry about the potential sag in the veneer. So these are all issues that we would talk about in the class, but suffice it to say that I've managed to get past it, but I can't say I have a recommended best approach. I was going to just continue with these, even pass these things around. Just a simple seahorse that I wanted to do. This one I loved because it was just so remarkably tight when it was done. There was absolutely you can still see some of the smoke from the laser. I did no cleanup on this, and everything just fit so beautifully because, the curve compensation was right. And this one over here, I don't know why I'm pointing out all my flaws to you guys, okay? But here's the flaw on this one. There's several of them, but one of them is the finish I put on this was one of the oils. And I was using one of those lint-free rags, lint-free paper towels. Those are blue. Can you see the blue caps for that?
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah. But that was the flaw on this baby here. This one I liked, particularly because, again, just like the nose for the Mickey Mouse, I really saw this flaw, and I really wanted it to be right at the center of my flower. And this had some really beautiful exotic woods in it, which was really nice. One of the nice things, too, about this is exotic woods, with their veneers, they're always super cheap. And you can play with a wide variety. I got started with a $99 package from a place called veneersupplies.com. It was all cutoffs. You just throw in a bunch of stuff in the box. I got huge amounts of, it comes to these 15 different types of wood. Great starting point. And then I just started to acquire more as time goes by. This is the first and only project that I've done that I consider an attempt at doing art. It has interesting origins, and some of you may have seen this last week when we had our CNC sig. I used Midjourney, which is one of those generative AI systems for images, and I wanted a pop art version of Marilyn Monroe's, and I had to iterate and change words, etc. But I got this and I liked it, and then this is what the result is. So this is the rendering. Actually, this is not the rendering. This is the real thing. This is what you'd actually see when you pass this around. Because I didn't finish cleaning it off. This is part of my oiling process. I didn't see that until after I'd taken the picture. It's not on this one right here. But here you have, I think there were 12 different woods I used in this. And this is the first time I kind of scaled it up a little bit, because with all these projects, you can start passing around, they're learning projects. So if you do something that's small because you want to learn, the resulting pieces are small. So it's just, you get with lots of little tiny pieces. I want to do something that was a little bit larger. But look at how I was able to use just the character of the wood in her hair in particular. When I saw that this was a part of the definition of pop art, I knew I was kind of getting to where I wanted to go. But that's when I found out about coloredveneers.com. I haven't colored veneers before this project. So that was the first one that I did along those lines. I'm in a community that gets together once a week on Marquetry. This guy is one of our community members. He just won first place in a contest. This is 960 pieces. See the dimensions. This is like 24 by 36. It's really large. So we had a lot of pieces, but they were also a little bit bigger and easier to work with. But there's certain things like this earring right here, and some of the hair. There's a lot of small pieces they had to work with. And he, of course, as most of us do, were working towards a deadline. Didn't start early enough. So he was working like crazy, but he got it done. He won first place, and that is just where it can go. Competitions are something that are out there. This is something that I'm a part of, which is in San Diego, and this is 20 years worth of the winners in our Marquetry exhibition. And it's probably what inspired me a lot when I wanted to get into this a little bit. Look at this guy's six reports. He's done this in several years.
Is that like a full size?
It is. Yeah.
Oh wow.
And I mean, it's just gorgeous what he's done in here. Now, admittedly, he's using really large pieces and straight lines, so it's a little bit easier. But just look at the beauty of it. It's really impressive. And just another one or two. You can see he's won a couple of years.
Okay,
Yes.
I just wonder if I could, there's some of the furniture.
Yes? Oh, it's good. Let's get a piece of furniture. How about this?
And that's Marquetry.
It's Marquetry. That's Marquetry. And traditionally, just so you guys know, this has been around since like the 1400s. If you go to Versailles in France, it's stunning how much incredible world-class marquetry you see there. It just blows your mind. They were using blades and hand saws, and there's a guy in San Diego who actually teaches the techniques from the 1500s using this bench that's specially designed for back then. But it made it kind of inaccessible to most of us. But when you get a laser for $350 and the software is $100, I mean, it's worth trying. So that's what I did, and that's my presentation on first inlays, which again, we're putting wood pieces into a larger wood piece. And we have a technique that we can teach here. And the second topic was marquetry, where we're taking very thin woods and just putting together as large jigsaw puzzles to make images. And James is going to, you know those hooks they use to put people off stage? I think it's going to
Wait, what do the comedians use? The red light?
Since the marquetry uses veneers that are so thin, how do you account for like wood glue? Because wood glue is messy, and I feel like can seam over, and you know what I mean. And it doesn't look like you've got a lot of room for sanding.
So, a couple of topics real quickly. When it comes to the glues, it's a big issue. You have to choose the right glue. Some of them are going to leave surface stains. Some are going to permeate and leave the wood at the seam, at the gaps, a little bit discolored, etc. There are special veneer glues that have a longer curing time, and they don't have as much evidence when they're finished and hardened and cured. So that's what I use as a veneer glue for that. There are also some things like what's it called? The glue that's made from cow hooves. Hide glue, right. So that's actually reversible, so you can actually reheat it and move the pieces around, etc. And it doesn't have the characteristics of showing up all that much either. The second question you had was with regard to sanding. Now, sanding, yes, you can with the high grades. You know, get the sanding that you want done. It's actually kind of nice because sometimes it also fills in the tiny gaps that you've got between the pieces. But obviously, there's not a lot of thickness for sanding. But using the high grits, the sanding on this that you want to do, it's great. But there was one piece that I sent around with the guy with the radiating lines on the head. Those are score marks. Those are just light burns on the surface. So if you choose to do a lot of scoring, or what's called sand shading, where if you took a piece of veneer, this is the manual process, you had some hot sand and you poured it over the edge, it sort of burns it a little bit, and it gives things a three-dimensional look. It could be really a fantastic addition to a marquetry project, but you're precluding sanding, because if you sand it, you're going to rub it right off, or you're going to smear the smoke marks into surrounding material. So, you know, there are all sorts of trade-offs that
So for pieces like that beautiful table or that surfboard, I would assume they're not using thin little veneers for that.
No, they are. They really are.
They are?
Yeah, yeah. If you go out and buy veneers, the vast majority are like between 1/40th and 1/128th of an inch thick. That's how thin the material is that you're working with. And I'd say probably all this, because this is a category called marquetry, and
May I ask if you're willing to share? So how would you, like for instance, a surfboard or that tabletop,
Yeah.
if you're not using inlays but using marquetry, how would you get that tabletop surface or that thick surfboard to have that visual?
I don't know what he did in particular, but you'd be starting with a line drawing, because he didn't use any laser techniques. His project is actually too big for being able to do that. You know, the board's 9 feet tall or whatever. And you would be laying it out on paper before you'd actually be putting it on here. And you'd be using a guide that you cut out of the paper on the veneers to actually trace and cut. So it's a manual version, what they've been doing for hundreds of years until the last few years. It's all been manual, using stencil templates that you've designed and cut out.
And then they just glue that on?
Yes.
Wow.
So they're putting that thin veneer on top of a base material.
Right.
Okay,
So
I was
that-
thinking the
yeah.
whole material was
No, no,
assembled.
Oh, no,
that
it's just
way.
the skin. This does not go in the water.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like that table, for instance, it's got a
Yeah.
base material, and then you're putting the veneer into that.
Very
So that's
cool.
where your strength is.
Thank you, thank you.
Any other last minute questions before that red dot? Yes.
I'm more about your, I like your veneer with that organizing. It's like, is there
Well, yeah,
a
the
standard
right,
size
the
veneer
red
you
dot,
use, or
but
you
that is
can't
from
then
the
make it go
chips.
down?
Bigger than this, I
This
guarantee you.
presentation.
And that's one of the big trade-offs. You can get veneers in really large sheets, and they don't come in this size. But when I started, I thought, oh, I'm really smart. I'm going to make them all fit in something like this so that I can keep an inventory. And then I'm looking at projects where people have just big swaths of veneer that they're using, and I'm thinking, well, I don't even know where I'd scan that to be able to get it in to inventory. How would I inventory those? But I mean, people have answers to those questions. I just didn't think that I'd be doing this very much. I've done it more than I ever
That might be a case point where, like, having the camera on the lid of like Tarkin,
Yeah.
you'd only be able to do it once. You wouldn't be able to scan it, take it off.
Yeah.
But if you had the camera there and then you're moving your pieces around to line up your grain there.
Right, and one of the challenges with cameras is the distortion. Whereas if you're scanning on a flatbed, I mean, if I wanted this particular portion of grain right here on a flatbed, and I put my vectors right there, I'm going to get that right there. Now, if I'm taking a picture from above and there's any fisheye distortions towards the edges, etc., I'm not necessarily going to get Mickey on the center. You know, it's going to be something maybe thrown off a little bit. But
There's a lot of ways to, software that can help.
there is, there absolutely is. I mean, parallax adjustments that can be done in Photoshop, etc. But no, that's that. So the idea is, if you're all interested in these topics, James wants to know, and James has this right here, which you can put your name and contact information down on, and we need to move on to the next topic.
Yes.
So,
One thing, thank you, Travis.
You bet.
One thing. One thing I wanted to follow up, and again, if you'll just mention it on the paper if you are. We floated, they kind of talked about doing this with the 3D printers, and I don't think it ever got off the ground, but Travis mentioned he does a lot of this with his little desktop laser, which nowadays have become a lot more affordable and very easy to use in your home. They're not going to cut through plywood and stuff like that, but for veneers and stuff, they're great. So if there's any interest, we thought it'd be cool if we found a unit that was affordable for people, that we could have a class where your class price is purchasing the laser, you bring it to assembly, we all put it together, show you some software, get you up and running, and then you have a laser to take home and try this stuff at home. So I'm not sure, you know, if that's of interest to people to do that. Like Travis said, I think his was $350. I've seen some of them a little bit cheaper. So before we go down the road of trying to find all that, if that's something of interest, just let us know.
And for those who are assembly members,
What's
you
the
can do.
maintenance on those?
Sorry, go ahead.
The maintenance on them, like changing out parts, like,
Oh.
does it wear out?
No, I mean, eventually the diode does atrophy over a long, long period of time, but for all practical purposes, you're not gonna find concern there. Just a quick sidebar, which was, we did this with 3D printers in Virginia. A whole community of people got together, built them. And one of the neat things that came out of that was we actually had a community of a shared interest. So there was reason to get together, to share ideas, to meet periodically, et cetera. And here, for instance, we have a CNC community that I believe is feeling like that. And it could well be around topics like marquetry or lasers or whatever. It all could be dumped into one digital tools special interest group. All things that are possible when you get people with like minds together, and this place affords us that opportunity. Absolutely.
So, on the CNC side, Travis did the Inlay one, which I've taken the class with Travis, and I actually made an engagement.
You taught the class with me.
Taught the class with Travis, and then I actually used that to make a engagement ring box, which the photo's on my phone there, so I can't show you right now. But with that inlay technique, you were able to get those sharp, crisp, and the design was, maybe a 1/16 of an inch, and it all just glued together perfect, bandsaw across. That part just blows my mind. You glue these tiny little things together, run it through a bandsaw and sand it, and it's all still there. And it's about that V-carve specifically. So today I'm gonna cover a couple topics. One of the first ones I wanted to talk about that we've seen from a lot of people using the machines here is using the dogholes on the machines. I was gonna try to get into some jig work, but that's just gonna take us through the rest of tomorrow if we got into that. But I wanted to explain the dogholes on the machines. If you're on Discourse, you've probably seen the topics that we're having. When we replace the spoil board, we go in, flatten, and do all that stuff, and then we cut dogholes into.
That's what I put it all the way.
Yeah. And the idea for those dogholes, if you've taken our class, we'll tell you that sheet of MDF that we put on the Swift specifically is a 5x10 3/4 inch sheet of MDF. We do not square that up to the machine. That just would be ridiculously hard to do and slightly unnecessary. What we do instead is we cut these dogholes around the machine, and since the machine cuts these dogholes, we know those are square to the machine. We tell you very specifically in class, do not trust the edges of even the phenolic table or the MDF. Trust cuts in the machine because that's what's made it, that's how you know it's squared. So cutting the dogholes helps you out with that. We have cut the dogholes on the IQ now. They were cut slightly incorrectly, so we'll redo that one. But once we have that one, this process will be the same for that for the IQ machine. So the idea on the dogholes is to give you two things. One, a really quick way to reference parallel and squareness on the machine. The other way is if you're doing production work, to give you somewhere to be able to slide your material back to over and over. A third way that I haven't seen a ton of people use is if you're doing two-sided milling. If you're doing two-sided milling, you need to be able to square something up, mill it, and then you need to be able to flip it up and put it back in the exact same spot. So having the dogholes can definitely help you out with all that. We have a DXF file, close through all these things, that we've released to some, and we'll send it out in the CNC group specifically, but basically this is the file in V-carve that we've created those dogholes with. It's a very simple file. I believe I'd have to double check, they're like 19mm holes. We spaced them out to a distance we thought was appropriate without cutting too much into the machine. Same thing on the IQ. But they're just cut out around the perimeter of the machine. The important part, if we go to the pictures here, get rid of Travis's picture. So these holes here, you'll have two sets of holes on the machine. These smaller holes right here, obviously that have the screws in them, those are the bolt holes that we use to hold the spoil board down on the machine. But these larger holes right here are the dog holes that fit the steel dogs that we have in the toolkit for the Laguna. We're going to purchase some more dogs. We're probably going to purchase aluminum ones. I'm not the biggest fan of the aluminum ones because if you've seen the clamps on the IQ, steel bits will damage the aluminum ones. But the aluminum ones are easy to turn down. We're only cutting these dogs about 12mm into the spoil board, and most of those dogs, when you buy them, are about an inch and a quarter, so they stick out kind of far, and they'll start wobbling. So you'll see some more dogs show up for the machine. Some will be stainless steel. Don't hit your bit with that. Your bit will lose against stainless steel. But the idea is that you can come in, add one of these dog holes right here, and it gives you a nice flat edge to line up your machine. By using a couple of them in various different configurations, we now can very easily, very quickly square up our material to the machine without having to run the bit down the side of the material. If you haven't if you've never used dogs or something like that, the truest way to square material up on the machine, if you're trying to get completely accurate, is like they do in machining. You bring your bit over the edge of the material, you get it right on that edge, and then you start walking your bit down the material, and you watch to see if it's bearing in or out, if you need to push a material. Very tedious process. In machining, they use an actual edge finder. It's very accurate. It gets you the tolerances. Most people using wood CNC don't need that type of tolerance. So it's not as tedious, but doing the dogs is definitely much quicker. The second thing about doing the dogs that makes it really easy, if you notice in the V-carve file here, these dogs are offset to the corner of the machine here. This origin point, and this is the key that makes this all work, that origin point, when you turn on the machine, the first thing that machine asks you is to home the machine. So you go and you home the machine, because the machine comes back to the front left corner and it's sitting at the home. Your work coordinates then, as soon as the machine homes, you say X, Y to 0 right there. And then there's an offset that sets this corner right here. So if I were to take this square, draw it out in here, and then so if I take my vector and I base it on the edges of those dogs, when I've zeroed the machine, homed the machine, and then set the machine to 0, 0 right there, I don't have to jog the bit to the corner of that plywood now. I've taken that compensation by using the offsets in the file here, and now I know exactly where the corner of that piece of wood is. I actually printed a sticker that's on the front of the machine in case you don't have that Dogholes file and you want to know where that corner of the dog is. It's 59 in the X and 81 in the Y. That's printed on the front of the machine. I kept forgetting to do it the way I just showed you on V-carve, so I actually printed that sticker and put it on the back of my phone, because I've always got my phone when I'm designing stuff. But by setting your 0, 0 in V-carve, Fusion, whatever you're doing, and then offsetting your material 59, 81, you no longer have to move the bit over to set your 0 point. At that point, the only thing you do is set your Z height, which you're going to have to do all the time anyways. So it makes setting up your material really fast, really repeatable, and you're squared up to the machine. That's the biggest benefit of the dogs. The second thing that we're going to do on the IQ, if you're familiar with that machine, Molly, one of the members, made a bunch of MDF clamps. A lot of them are based on the T-tracks, but one of the things that we thought would be nice is we're going to have the dog holes around the outside of the machine like they are currently, and then you have the bolt holes in the middle of every slat to hold them down. Well, those bolt holes have now been cut the same size as a dog hole, and we're going to make some clamps that fit inside that dog hole, like cam style clamps, so that you can put it in there and cam lock your material really quickly without having to use the T-tracks and stuff like that. The biggest thing with the dog hole, somebody previously had cut a whole bunch of dog holes in every one of the slats, which again, the thing that makes this work is you have to cut the dog holes on the machine that you're using. That way the file can be referenced to the machine. Both of those times they were cut on a different machine, so there's no way to reference those holes. But the past one, there was a grid of 5 cut multiple places, and on the IQ, a lot of people use the tape and glue method. So we're trying to keep the number of holes down because you lose surface area for that tape to really bond to. I think even in the CNC class after those, we had a couple times where the cutting board would never break free, and all of a sudden it's breaking free every class. And it was just we were taking too much surface area out of that. So by keeping the dog holes on the outside and then utilizing the already holes that we have to have for the bolts, I think that's going to give us plenty of spots for those dog holes to work. So this will definitely be something if we go into a jig class or more, we'll get more into it and do that at the machine and show you how quickly that can set up. It makes it really easy when we replace the spoil board. Again, we don't put that on very accurately, we get it close, but I don't have to reference anything. So now I can be cutting the spoil board after I've loaded it, which can take some time, cutting that spoil board very quickly. So that's our dog holes, and I'll share that DXF file with anybody that wants it. I can send it out in the CNC SIG email as well. Any questions? So our next one that we wanted to talk about was Mosaic. So for those of you that aren't familiar, Mosaic is a cabinet building software. It's a fairly expensive software. They charge you monthly for it. Asmbly has multiple licenses here. There's one in the textiles room, and then both of the, no, I'm sorry, there's one textiles, one on the small IQ computer out in the shop. Idea being similar to what we had with VCarve. We want a quiet space to sit down and program in textiles, and then we want one at the computer so you're not running back and forth back to both computers. The best thing I can say about Mosaic, once you get everything set up in Mosaic, it is incredibly easy to cut out custom cabinets and to do it very fastly. Setting up Mosaic can take quite a bit of time. Learning Mosaic is a learning curve, I would say, is probably equal to Fusion. Recently, there's a member named Michael Morris here, and I told him, man, Mosaic, I've gone home every night this week and just gone down this rabbit hole of Mosaic, and then one of our members, Jennifer, I think she's on the Zoom call, introduced me to Frost CNC, who does tooling, but also does product libraries for Mosaic, and that just dove me down even farther. And I'm doing projects I never wanted to do, projects like this vent hood up here, just because I'm like, well, how easy is that to cut, you know? And this was done with Mosaic, and in 30 minutes I've designed it on the computer, and in an hour I've got all the ribs cut out. The plywood part is still a challenge to do, but I got a guy at Fusion that kind of helped me out with that. But it will take you quite a bit of time to learn Mosaic. If we get enough interest, that'll be a class that we can sit down and help people start getting into it. But once you've got it set up, cutting out an entire kitchen, I mean, you could design that kitchen in less than an hour and be cutting on the CNC machine. There's a couple things, I'm going to go over these real briefly. When you buy Mosaic, they give you, I believe it's supposed to be an hour-long tutorial over Zoom, and I think the same thing like us, the guy was like, well, if you got time, I got another 45 minutes, I'll talk for you. So we went through that, and they'll show you going through all those settings. There's hundreds of videos out there that go over there, and the way I kind of learned was started with one project, and then as I'm going through that and realize I need to learn something new, going on YouTube and figuring out how to do that specific one. But the first thing that you're going to do when you go into Mosaic is you're going to go up and you're going to set up your products library. And so when you go into your products here, so I need to go back. First thing I do is go and set up my materials library. And this is one of the things that makes Mosaic very powerful is when you set up all your parameters, it takes away, in VCarve, if you're going to cut through 3/4 inch plywood, you have to set your tool depth every single time. If you're going to do a dado, you have to say how deep you want to do it. Well, Mosaic creates these libraries with all those parameters put in there. That way, when you go and put a cabinet together and it says you're using 3/4 inch plywood and dado cuts and pocket holes, it's got all those parameters set and it just automatically assigns it. So the first thing you do is you come in here and you set up your plywood. This is where you have to be pretty precise about that stuff. I tell people, when we do the class, always mic your material. 3/4 inch plywood from Home Depot is never 3/4 inch. Well, same thing with Dakota. You'll see I have Dakota 3/4, Dakota 1/2 inch in there. And if you go over to the thicknesses, they're 0.69 and 0.48 or 0.46. The reason that's important is not necessarily for just the through cuts. It's going to help you prevent from messing up your spoil board. But when it's doing dado cuts and stuff like that, it's actually setting the thickness of that dado cut. So I go in, when I did this, I had my 3/4 inch plywood from Dakota, I mic'd it, and I did a couple test pieces, and I did some dado cuts. I said, oh, that one's too tight, and so I go in and add a little tolerance. And you set all that stuff, and once you've set it once, you shouldn't have to come back. I've labeled mine Dakota because it is very specific to your material, so if you're buying from Home Depot one weekend and fine lumber the next week or something, all these settings are going to start to change a little, and you'll see, my dados don't fit quite right, or my blind tenons are a little too snug or something like that.
You can also change this in optimization every single time you want to do it if you don't have your material beforehand.
Yeah. So, and I'll show you a little bit about it, but this is kind of like your master library, and this is where you're starting all your settings. So you start off by setting, your materials, and then one of my favorite things with the libraries is you go into your, I got the optimization, so I'll talk about that later. Then we go into our products, and so if we're in, you start off with, and this is where knowing cabinetry to begin with is going to help you, because I didn't know anything about cabinets, so I had to sit down with Jennifer Childs, and she sat down with books and this and that and started telling me about all this cabinets. And that's when I decided to pick the hardest cabinet out there, which is a inset face frame cabinet. So apparently face frame cabinets are really easy because your doors can be slightly off and you got plenty of adjustment, you got a frame. Frameless cabinets are a little bit harder because they got to line things up and you need to be closer. Inset face frame means you have the frame in the door and they're flush, and all your gaps have to be perfect because there's no adjustment. I mean, maybe microns of adjustment. And Jennifer said, as a cabinet builder, she goes, this is one you absolutely hate. My fiance's grandpa, when I went to talk to him, said, oh, people that like those are dumb. And he's built houses and stuff for years. He's got this catalog of old printed pictures that are just beautiful. And so I never wanted to build a face frame inset, and he said those are dumb. I said, well, now I know what I'm building. He's the guy that still gets a table saw and rips out cabinets like that. And I'm like, hey, let me CNC some of these cabinets. He's like, oh, that sounds great. And I come back and he's already building them. I'm like, well, now I got to build something you say is too dumb to build. So Jennifer introduced me to this, and then I went down that rabbit hole. But you go into these cabinets, you figure out, you know, which cabinets you're going to build. They have all different style cabinets. But basically, you pick a cabinet, and again, this is your master catalog. And so you can go in, you can set up widths, heights, all that kind of stuff. You can go into your interior, you can change your different shelf heights, your drawer heights. You go into your face frame, we can change where our doors are, how many doors. All this stuff you go through and set up, and this is the stuff that's real tedious that you do in the beginning. And if you were like a cabinet maker doing a bunch of them, or you're a guy that wants to do your own cabinets at home, you know, you're going to be doing the same style. You spend the time to set this up and to get it on the CNC, and it's going to cut out incredibly quickly, and it's going to cut out correctly every single time. But this will be where you spend a bulk of the time setting up this kind of material. And it's very useful once you get into that stuff. And there's also people, so for me, for instance, that face frame inset from Frost, you could go in and design all this stuff. Michael Morse, another guy that's got into, you know, I sent him down the mosaic rabbit hole. He said he's over 100 hours into learning mosaic right now. And he's in there making all his own custom settings for the way they build. And he's figured all that stuff out. I'm like, I'd rather just pay this guy that's already done it, you know, $100 for his file set and just be cutting out. But you can do as much as little as you want on that one. But you go in and you set up your library. You can set up all your handles. All your libraries have your materials, doors, drawer boxes, your hardwares. If you're using bloom, slides, what hinges, all that kind of stuff. And most of that stuff, when you say, okay, I'm going to use a bloom soft close 536H, they've got all the drill holes and all that stuff programmed in there so that when it adds it to your cabinet with your drawer, it's already adding the drill holes for all that stuff. So you get all that stuff set up, and then you go into a room. And so this is my laundry room at home, and I wanted to create these two cabinets here. I created two separate cabinets because I wasn't sure which style I wanted to create. But you go in, you create your cabinets. When you get to your cabinet here, you just literally can drag a cabinet straight over. You can do quick changes down here for your sizing and all that. And the great thing is, as you change those, it adapts all your mortise joints, your drawer links, your hardware, and all that stuff. It automatically adapts that to those parameters that you've set in there. So I'm not going to do anything with that cabinet. Once you go into the cabinet, and this is something where, watching videos will show you. Again, you have all these settings you can change just on the fly and not update your whole tool database, so that if you're, just wanting to make a change to this specific cabinet. One of the things I learned very recently that was very cool, so you go into a 3D view here, and I wanted to see, you can go in this wireframe and I can kind of see, I've got, looks like a rabbit or something here, but I wanted to see a better detail of that. So if I go to a perspective and I go into a fill joint, I can see the cabinet in a 3D view. I can see my back stringers, all that kind of stuff that I've set up, my face frame, my hardware. I go into wire, it'll show you I've got a sliding drawer inside where the drill holes are, where the door hinge holes are. But it's kind of hard to see in that wire frame right there. It's not the easiest thing to see everything. Go back to fill. I think Jose Gayton was the one that was in textiles when I learned this on YouTube, and I did this and I screamed in the middle of textiles. You can go to this slide perspective view right here, and then you can blow everything apart and go in there and see all your dado joints. And I can see now in here, I've got joints fitting inside, I've got dados for the drawers, all my holes and everything. Stuff like that can be something that takes you a while to learn and kind of figure that out, but once you do, it's very useful and very convenient to use. Once you get your design done, you've done your kitchen, your laundry room, whatever, you can go in straight to a cut list. So even if you're just doing this out on a table saw, it's going to give you a list here, and it's going to break it up by your different materials here. When I go to 3/4 inch birch, it's going to tell me all my cuts that I need to do there. It's going to label some of the face frames and tell me how many I need. And if I wanted to do this on a table saw, it's real easy, ready to go. Obviously, I don't want to do this on the table saw. I want to go into the CNC to do it, so I'm going to click this Optimize button. And this is basically the version we're in right now, just Mosaic. That's kind of what I would consider your CAD version of everything, and now Optimizing is going and doing all of our CAM. We start off in our CAM. I went to optimize this, and I selected it, and it told I wanted to use all my 3/4 inch birch parts. So it's automatically imported all these parts in for me. I can go in, like Zach said, I can pick my material here. I can change my parameters real quick if I want to. I can add some trim to the edges. That's something, you know, plywood edges usually suck, so I put a 1/4 inch trim to make sure I'm not cutting on the edge of the plywood. I can tell it I only want it to cut the grain a certain direction if I want to. I can change all that stuff in there. I go in and look at my parts and I say all these parts look okay. When I go into my libraries here, now I have a CNC tooling library, and this is something I think Mosaic just nailed when they did it. You go in here and you have a list, and you can put all your tools that you have in Mosaic, and you change your settings like you would in VCarve or something like that. Put our diameter, our pass depths, our speeds. But then down here we go in and we say, what is this tool allowed to do? So if I'm using my 1/4 inch down shear bit, which is a very common bit I use, I'm going to allow that bit to cut my dado and a CNC door out of it. But I'm not going to let it do a cutout because I want a compression bit for that. So I'm going to go into my 1/4 inch compression, and now I'm going to tell it that tool can use a cutout. If I were to go use an automatic tool changer, I can go in and you can see all your tools that you're using and what you've got them set to do here. You can set in your drill bits. I've got a 5mm drill bit for the hinge screw holes and all that stuff. So you set all your tooling at one time.
So what does the term door mean in this context? CNC door, I don't know.
Oh, that's for the
Profile cut?
profile cut on the face frame inset.
It's specific to a project. This concept is.
It's so when you set up those libraries, it'll have cut styles in there, and it'll know. So like it knows a door is so CNC door means the CNC is going to cut your door out, and so it knows, and that's what you're telling it there.
Okay.
And so some of these can be again pretty tedious to go in there and set all those up. That Frost CNC, that's one of the things they do is if you look down at this. Down at the very bottom here, they actually sell toolkits with these tools and the files to set them up in Mosaic for you. And if you're not interested in doing all this, it's not a bad price. It's more than I wanted to pay, and I had a lot of the tooling already, so I just set them up manually.
So, you know, I don't have all these tools, so you go and uncheck everything, like.
You
I
could,
just
so
wanna
like,
use 1/4 inch for everything?
yeah, if I didn't have a 1/4 inch compression and I still want to do that through cut, I could just say my 1/4 inch down cut could cut it. You know, I'm not
going
going
to delete it out of the list, or can you just uncheck it somehow?
You would uncheck it, you know, so compression right here, if I went back, I would just uncheck it from right here, and I would just have to make sure that I added it to a separate tool. So that
as
it
long
knows.
as it's unchecked there.
Yeah.
you could-
And so this application is, what this does, which I think is the coolest thing, is it's telling you when it goes to create your G codes, instead of you picking vectors and assigning a tool to them, it's automatically assigning your tools to all the vectors for you, and it's doing it based on what you told it that tool can do. So once you set up all your tools and stuff like that, we go in here, we go to the optimizer, just like you know, any of those softwares. I've got a post processor for the Laguna Swift put in there. I've downloaded that from Laguna's website actually. Put it in there. I can go in, I can set up different things inside of this setting here. If I go into my machines, this is where I can go in and set up what kind of cuts I'm allowing it to do, how much part spacing, all that stuff. We go up to set up our CNC router. We've got our clearance heights, our plunge. Hold downs if I want to add, there's tabs in here somewhere. I think that's in the hold down or something like that. But again, you have to go in and set up a specific machine to you. This would be something if we had a class or something like that where we would have that file set up in our computers already, which I think Zach's put a lot of this stuff in our computers because he uses Mosaic here quite a bit as well. So you go into all this, you got all this done, and we hit this optimize button right here, and it just goes in right there for us and creates everything and creates patterns out of the sheet, automatically nests each sheet for you. Tells me I'm going to need 2 sheets of plywood to be able to cut this part out. I double click it on here, it's going to show me more details, shows me labels, what my parts are on the computer at least. You can buy Mosaic's integrated label printer machine. That's pretty stupid expensive and stick labels on. But if I ran a cabinet shop, I mean, instead of writing these out, I'm going to stick labels on it. Michael Morse, for instance, just bought Avery labels, and he was able to print the labels out on his own sheet, and he just sticks those instead of buying a little thermal printer. But it's gone in, it's created all my cuts, it's created all my dados, all my drill holes and everything, told me what everything is. I go over here to generate G code, I hit calculate, and it's now just calculated every tool path for each of the tools that I'm going to use for that. I didn't click a single vector, I didn't have to go look for all the drill holes and everything, and it's gone in there and done all that for me. If I had a automatic tool changer, I could just go ahead and create the G code, and it would set it up all to run in one tool file. If I don't have a tool changer, I turn this off, come over to my drill, I hit G code, and it's spitting out a file for me to take to the machine right there. That to me is one of the coolest things that this program does, especially, and this happened quite a bit and still happens. I go and I cut one of these panels out and I realize I did something wrong and I go back and I make a change. I just come back to the optimizer, I send it back and I hit re-optimize and it's redid all the toolpaths for me. I don't have to go back, pick those vectors again, remember which ones, or even know which ones changed. I just said, oh, that cabinet was 2 inches too wide, let me shorten it up and cut it again.
So by just assuming I properly marked all my material, put it in, 3 decimal places or whatever, how good is the dado fit? Like,
They're
does
incredible.
it work first time?
They're incredibly good. If you get your set, and again, you have to get your tolerances right. And even when you go to do your, like the dados, you can go and add tolerances into those in that library. The first cabinet I cut with dados, so the first one I cut, I only had dados on the back. And that sucked because then I was like, oh, I'm back to measuring the fronts, trying to line them up. So I had to go back and readjust it and tell it to put dados and stuff. But the first one I got with all dado construction, I could put the cabinet together, light taps of the mallet, and it held itself together. No screws, no glue, and it was sitting on the shelf there, and I could pick it up and move it around.
So out of the box compensation for the dado was.
Yeah, as long as you set up that material correctly, and that's where doing your test in the beginning. So like with the Dakota plywood, I mic'd it, and you know how mics are, you squeeze a little hard, you don't squeeze hard enough. So I mic'd it, I put a dado in there, and it was really, really tight, and I could hammer it together. But I was like, I'm not gonna be able to assemble these real well. So then I took them back apart, went and mic'd my material a little bit better. Getting your material correct, because all the cuts and compensation, one thing Travis mentioned earlier with the inlays and the lasers is the kerf. Well, with CNC, we pick on the line, outside, inside the line. Well, Mosaic, you don't pick any of that because it already knows where it needs to be to get you that. So having the thickness of that material dialed in perfectly is also going to make sure all your parts fit together correctly.
Yeah, but something that happens a lot with a lot of materials, you get variance in the material,
Yeah.
there's shrinkage, whatever. So the way that I run it is if you run to your libraries and you go to your job parameters when you're starting your whole job, you can input your dado depth and dado width variance tolerances by yourself based on that, and it's usually something between like 0.009 or something like that, and you'll get a perfect fit on the dado.
Yeah.
So it's just a different way to go about it, but same kind of concept, so you can pretty much dial it in right onto that.
Yeah, and that's, again, yes, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are there any cabinets we've made that are in the shop in our area?
We have not, and I
made
just...
one and somebody took it the other day. We made it, gave it away. It was just sitting there.
No, I mean,
it was like a little
above
carcass
the
sample.
refrigerator, we put some
Yeah.
cabinets up. I
Yeah.
sure would like to
So
have
we haven't.
some examples.
Shane just mentioned in one of the channels wanting to build a cabinet for next to the refrigerator.
Yeah.
And I said, can we do a mosaic demo?
Absolutely.
And Shane said, well, that's gonna take a little longer and cost a little bit more money. And I said, but we get to educate people. So I haven't got the go ahead to do that yet, but that is the idea, is to move these forward with stuff like, let's create one up here and we'll do it up here.
So, what if you wanted to just bring, buy modular stuff for the backing for the interior parts, but you wanted to mill the front facing parts of the cabinet?
So
Like
you
do a
can-
custom.
You can pick right here, even if you design the whole cabinet, which would be good on that case to me. What you would do on that one is you design your whole cabinet, you can take the cut list to cut the pieces that you're talking about that you want, but then you want to mill the front. So you can come in here and you can take out parts that you don't want. The easier way if you're doing that is when you come into your parts here, you can take them out of here and optimize it without those parts in there.
You could almost just reface
Yeah. And
stuff that's already there.
And you can add that tolerance again for stuff that's already there. Like if you're gonna reface something and it's built out of 3/4 and you're gonna design it, and you need to take out the veneer thickness or something like that, you can add all that in.
And one more question. What about structural issues like the countertop itself, how much weight it bearing?
All that stuff you can put into those parameters. I mean, when I did the Zoom call, when I bought the software, Jennifer was on there with me, and at the end the guy was like, okay, let's go set up your parameters real quick. And he's like, so do you do a 300mm toe kick or a 250? And Jennifer's like, oh, I do the 275. And all of a sudden it very quickly became evident that I have no idea how to build a cabinet, but she did. And so they're just going boom, 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 boom. But you can go in and set how many horizontal partitions you need, what kind of
It will
support
tell
on the
you,
bottom.
or it will suggest you, like, you're gonna put a cooktop on the.
It'll go from-
Once you want it to be able to handle like 200 pounds.
It's going to go from a parameter in a file that was built. So like if you go to a generic base stove cabinet, somebody's designed that one and it's gonna start with that one. And if you would need to know, do I think that's gonna be enough or do I need to add some more supports? And you can go in there and change that up how you see fit. I don't know specifically, like they do have an appliance library, and so you can tell it you're building a cabinet for this appliance. I don't know where they tell you like the structural side of that. I know there's some in there because I've seen videos of that stuff. But I think you would still have to know, like, you know, for instance, do you want 3 ribs or do you want 4 ribs? You know, and you can go into the parameters and change that. It's one cool thing that I found out doing a bunch of dados is awesome, but then when you want to screw it together, you got to pre-drill and all that stuff. And now I'm still tape measuring. Well, you can go into your dados and you can add screw holes into those. But you had to know you wanted to add those screw holes, and then you watch a video and it shows you, okay, here's your parameters, and it can say, for a dado 12 inches, I'm only going to put 2 holes, and it's going to be 1.5 inch from the front and 1.5 inch to the back. But if the dado goes beyond 20 inches, I'm going to add a 3rd hole in the middle. And so you just set those parameters, and then it knows automatically how many you do. And I think with the structural stuff, if you have a base cabinet that's 24 inches, it's going to say you need this support. And if it's 48 inches wide, it's going to say, okay, now you need this support in there. So I don't know the very specific about knowing weight, structure, and all that stuff, but it is designed specifically for cabinets, so I'm sure it's in there.
I have a couple questions about using Mosaic here at Asmbly. I guess what's the current status of usability for members? We have it on sheets.
So we have 2 licenses here. So Mosaic's a pretty locked down license. So you have to pay for Mosaic. They send you the download link. You have to install it, email back a user code, and then they email you an authorization code. That authorization code changes every time your payment goes through. So if you're buying it monthly, you have to update it monthly. I've switched to paying for it quarterly. So there's 3 or 4 of us now that are paying for a multi-seat license, and we've donated the last 2 to Asmbly. So once a quarter, I come in and I update the license codes for those. So as long as you're using it here,
Members can use it on premise here?
yeah, you have to use it here and there. You can use it, they don't have a trial edition, and if you try to do it at home, you can't even download it without contacting them first and paying for it. It's something like, you know, Michael, for instance, was one of those guys, he's like, I just can't fathom spending $150 a month. If you buy the first seat, I think actually is about to go up to $195 in January. And then each additional seat's like $60 or something. And he's like, I can't fathom that. So I said, well, let's, you know, try it out a little bit, you know, see what you think.